Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be back here with you in DC. I'm very impressed by the massive shift that has happened towards our industry. I've taken multiple trips here this year, and I've seen a big shift, not only in perception, but also in the willingness to take action. I completely agree with Cody and the folks from the Chamber of Digital Commerce that at the end of the day, this is a very unique opportunity for us in our industry to be formed in the right way. And because the US occupies such a large position in the global financial system, I think it'll reverberate from the US into the larger global financial system. So the decisions that are going to be happening here over the next 18 to 24 months will indeed shape our industry both here in the US and globally. I'd like to share with you some of the principles that I use to think about how this should develop and how the United States might want to look at both its position and how it relates to the global financial system as it goes into the Web3 transactional format. I have three fundamental principles that I think the United States financial system, and really any financial system, should care about. But because of the US's current role in the global financial system, as the global financial system migrates into the Web3 format, I think these three things are the most critical for the US financial system to achieve. The first one is to be the origination point and the source of issuances into the Web3 financial system. So it's very valuable that teams come back to the United States, but what is even more valuable is where the assets are originated. If the assets are originated in the US system, because it is the source of the most reliable methods of issuance and origination, then the United States will be the place where everyone gets their digital assets, even if they wrap and rewrap and package and repackage them. This is the fundamental metric of success that I think all of us should have for the US financial system, is what percentage of the Web3 financial system does the US issued base of assets occupy? What is its market share? For example, in the stablecoin world, it occupies well over 90% of the stablecoin underlying asset. That's what you would want to see for all other digital asset classes. You would want to see the United States financial system being the underlying source of assets that backs all the other on-chain assets. The second key principle is the automation of compliance. Compliance is basically the largest transaction cost. If you don't lower the transaction cost while you do create the best asset, the friction introduced for acquiring that asset will be too high. And so even if the United States successfully generates all the best assets, it may not be the place that experiences the most demand to buy those assets if there's too much friction to buy the asset. The automation of compliance is now possible in ways that it has never been possible before. And this doesn't mean removing compliance requirements. It means automating it to make them more efficient and reliable, while also making them lower cost. The goal of this would be to make the acquisition of that asset, the ability to hold that asset, and the ability to resell that asset low cost. At this point, you would have the US financial system having the best possible assets with the most reliability through things like proof of reserves, proof of composition, high standards for what on-chain real-world asset is. And you would have a low cost and low complexity to acquire the asset from international buyers in places like Dubai, Singapore, and Hong Kong. This will result in net capital inflows into the US economy, which is fundamentally what the US financial system wants and what the transition to a Web3-powered global financial system can allow the US to experience. I think the fundamental question is, when the US went from a paper-based financial system and the global system went from a paper-based system to an internet and database-powered system, how did the US acquire greater market share and leadership in the global financial system? And what will happen now for the United States as the global financial system transitions into this Web3 format? If the answer to both of these questions is affirmative and positive, then I think the answer is the US financial system gains market share. If the answer is negative, then I think the answer is the US system might lose market share. The final point is very critical in the United States relationship to DeFi, fintechs, and also institutions. It's the question of distribution. All financial markets depend on markets having demand. And so distribution and the ability for everyone to access the market globally is very, very valuable and powerful. The DeFi community and the fintech community and the institutional community can all play a very large role in taking those assets with a low cost of transaction and a low cost of compliance and acting as global distribution to get that capital to flow into the US financial system. So this is my high-level definition of success for how the United States financial system should evolve into the Web3 form that it's now taking. And my view is that this question of whether or not we care about Web3 formatted assets will only accelerate. And the reason for that will not be political, it will be economic. So the point at which stablecoins became a very hot topic here in DC was when there was a sufficient amount of US treasuries held in the Web3 format, such as a stablecoin. So a sufficiently large amount of treasuries were formatted into this Web3 smart contract stablecoin container. That will only increase. Right now, the amount of US treasuries is somewhere between Saudi Arabia and South Korea, or maybe even higher now, but it's only increasing. And eventually, I think stablecoins can be the largest holder of US treasuries as the most common form of owning and using the US dollar. But that is a realization that will happen for all other assets. So tokenized funds, tokenized equities, tokenized commodities, tokenized real estate, tokenized all asset types. Once they get high enough as a percentage of the market, the political system and the government has to address it because it's either a risk or an opportunity. And our job here as the key industry participants that have been driving this for many years is to get together and to make sure that the governments of the world see our industry as an opportunity by working with them to create, regulations and laws and pathways for all of this economic activity to benefit their economies. That is the right and logical path, in my opinion, and what we're all doing at this conference. Now, how do we actually achieve this, and what are the key requirements that need to be met? Well, the first requirement of any asset issuance is that it's reliable, and the US system is known for being highly reliable. So the first problem is, how do you do primary/initial minting? So how do you generate an asset to begin with? When you generate a cryptocurrency, it's often disconnected from anything in the real world. It's just a thing that was generated on a chain that has value because there is a market. Some of them have utility value and they can be used to pay for various systems, but many of them do not. In the real world digital asset world, we are talking about real underlying assets being represented on chain. And so we have to make sure that the representation of the asset on the chain is properly connected back to the underlying value, such that you can't generate more of the on-chain representation than you have in the real world. So you need to create systems that make something called infinite minting impossible, and that make it so that the assets issued in the US financial system can only be created to the degree that they represent real underlying value. For this to happen, you need various technologies like proof of reserves, proof of composition, and the ability to prove and connect the underlying real world back to the token. You basically need to synchronize the off-chain reserves with the on-chain representation of those reserves. The second problem is secondary or cross-chain minting. So because the blockchain industry is highly fragmented and we will not be having a single blockchain, just like we do not have a single global database that everyone uses, but everyone has, at this point, millions of their own separate databases, and all the databases are connected over TCP/IP to interact with each other in this thing called the internet. It's a very similar situation now with blockchains. So if you generate a token, if you initially generate a token, and you connect it back to underlying value in a way that's reliable, Then your next task will be distribution, which will be getting the token to many other chains. That task requires something called a cross-chain protocol. That cross-chain protocol will have to basically mint that token in hundreds and thousands of other chains. And if somebody manipulates that process of minting, you have something called a bridge hack. And that bridge hack will reduce the reliability, or the actual reliability and the perception of reliability of the underlying asset. So you have to solve the problem of how do you actually get the asset that was initially generated in the US system to many other chains and many other financial systems. For this, there are systems like CCIP and various ways to make sure that there are compliant transactions that work across chains. This is a problem that also absolutely needs to be solved for the distribution of the asset to be reliable, right? If you mint the asset initially, but then it gets lost in a bridge hack, that's not a reliable asset, right? You want a reliable asset tied back to real value, and then you want that asset to move somewhere on another chain in a way that can't be stolen. The last key dimension of creating reliable assets, in my opinion, is unified golden records. So unified golden records house all the critical information about the asset within the token itself. By putting all of the data about the asset within the token itself, you are turning the token not only into a method of ownership transfer, but also a method of transferring critical data. Because most market issues are about lack of information. Bernie Madoff is about lack of information. FTX is about lack of information. SVB is about lack of information. If you can get the relevant information on chain, you can eliminate Bernie Madoff, FTX, SVB, and many other similar situations. So the third dimension of making a reliable asset is that the asset doesn't just give you access to ownership, it gives you access to the critical data about the asset, so that if you own something from SVB, you know what the yield of their treasury is, not just that they have a treasury. Or if you have some relationship with FTX, their balance sheet is validated in real time, and there's no opportunity for it to be released in a surprise to the market. So this is where you're putting critical data on chain. This dynamic of creating a unified golden record, I think, is the critical next stage of how to manage risk and how to reduce the overall risk of assets in any financial system. And we're working here with folks in DC very actively to get a better and better set of standards for how assets in the US financial system can be created to prove critical things and therefore be a superior asset compared to others. By the way, this isn't just a concept that we have. This is from a recent presentation at the end of last year from the Treasury, where they describe what they call a core layer and a services layer to every token. And they describe them as having different information. So we are now in a world where if we want our industry to graduate from cryptocurrencies that are not connected to any real-world asset into a world where all the real world's underlying value is turned into a token that is reliable. And if we want that token that represents all that underlying value to be generated in the US financial system, and for the US to be the leading place that generates those tokens and the leading place that experiences the most demand for those tokens, then I think we're going to have to build all of these tokens in a significantly different way to both solve the problem of ownership and solve the problem of data transfer. Because both of these problems are fundamentally critical. Now, for this digital asset compliant, real world asset world. One of the things in the service layer of a token is compliance. Fundamentally, that's what we need to all collaborate with governments on. We need to figure out what is the efficient, low-cost, superior way to comply with the government's and society's various legal requirements while making it much, much cheaper than the traditional system. In the ideal world, where we are in a few years, is that you could buy a tokenized equity, or you could buy a traditional financial equity. The tokenized equity has much better liquidity, much more global access to capital. It is giving you critical information in ways that you don't need to buy costly and complicated data subscriptions. And it is able to be acquired by you and held by you and resold by you at a low cost of compliance. Fundamentally, what we all want to do, in my opinion, if we want our industry to succeed, is to make the DeFi and the tokenized asset fundamentally better than the traditional asset. And so I think we can do that, but we absolutely have to collaborate with governments and the legal system to do that. And I think we're in a very unique moment in time where that's finally possible. So I think we should make the most of it, and the time is now, and we can really make it happen. So I'm very excited about that. So thank you very much. I hope you have a good conference.